All right. I didn't want to miss out on any of our organic conversation because I'm so excited for. All right. Continue to tell your story. All right. So you got chainsaws going around your building.
We do. Yes, this neighborhood is kind of a cool historic area, but it is always loud. So very seasonal. Like I just said, we've got our haunted houses that go for about the month leading up to Halloween. And then we're pretty close to a couple of major train tracks. And so we've always got trains coming and going. And then on top of that, we are also in the flight path of the downtown airport. So we've got planes going overhead at random
Location,
intervals.
location.
Prime real estate, I tell you.
Wait. All right. So like with all the noise, did you guys do anything?
So we actually headed out of town. I know you and I had chatted really briefly because we were kind of in your neighborhood.
Ooh.
We did a long weekend in Santa Fe, which is one of our favorite places to visit.
Yeah.
Met up with my dad and his partner because coincidentally they were in the Taos area at the same time.
Hmm.
So we took a day trip up there, got to hang out. But I think that's kind of our strategy. It's like when things get really loud, there's one weekend of the month where all the antique shops are open and there's a lot of, just music and commotion. I think
Yeah.
our strategy is to just head out of town if we have the opportunity to do so.
I support it. I support it because like and maybe this is just the maturity slash 35-year-old in me. If I don't tolerate discomfort very well, if something like that, I'm like, you know what? Let's go. I'm out.
Yeah, the like you said, the level of discomfort and inconvenience, like it needs to kind of balance out. So I'm
It
willing
does.
to put up with a lot, but if we do have the chance to escape it, it's like, yeah, why wouldn't we? Nice little weekend away and a little digital detox, so to speak, is never a bad thing.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny because we were obviously talking in a lot of our DMs via TikTok. And I had mentioned that we went to Taos. The phenomenal thing about Taos, because my wife and I got married in Sedona. So we kind of look at Taos as like another extension of Sedona because it is very similar. I don't know if you caught that vibe, but we definitely did. Um, but being there aren't a whole lot of cell phone towers, especially where we stayed. So it was honestly really great to not have cell coverage and to just go explore. Did you experience that as well?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, if I had planned it differently and maybe planned it better, I feel like I would have allowed a little more time, especially for that high road that goes between Santa Fe and Taos. Because as we were going there, especially, we kind of marked like a couple spots, like, oh, that looks interesting. Like we should try and stop on the way back. But we were on a bit of a time schedule. My dad likes to be very punctual, so we were like, all right, we'll meet up with them, table that idea. But I think what we realized is, yeah, as vibrant as that in town community is, there's a lot of really cool stuff to see if you venture out a little bit further. And then of
Yeah.
course the lack of cell coverage means you better bring a map, because if you
Oh
don't
my God.
know where
Yeah.
you're going in advance, you could get pretty turned around.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's always nice to go back home. For us, because from Tucson going up to Taos, we got to stop in Albuquerque, which is where I'm from. So we got to
Mhm.
see a little bit of family, and it's such a weird time right now too. Because at least for us, we were fairly conservative over the past year, and until our daughter gets vaccinated, that's just we're kind of still walking that line and trying to re-implement. And I just noticed that, especially with like Latino cultures, I don't know, Cara, if you can resonate with this. Um, we love seeing each other. Like everyone just kind of gets together, and it was super different going back because that wasn't the vibe. And everyone's kind of like doing their own thing, being safe in their own way. And so it was kind of just different being up there. I mean, what did you see while you were traveling? Or how did you feel?
Yeah, I mean, we would probably classify ourselves as a little bit more conservative, and part of that is just the nature of being a little bit more isolated in our day-to-day lives regardless.
Yeah.
My partner and I are both really fortunate that we work from home. We're able to self-isolate really, really easily,
Yeah.
which is kind of a luxury in this time and
It really
circumstance.
is.
But yeah, traveling was interesting. I've had to hop a plane a couple of times for work at this point. During COVID. And I wouldn't say that there was ever a point that I felt, massively unsafe or uncomfortable, but it did feel like between the masking and the social distancing, it's sort of like this further degree of disconnect. And it's kind of like
Yeah.
everyone's like wearing this cloak.
I
Um,
know.
I wouldn't call it like a true invisibility cloak, like if there's any Harry Potter fans out there, but it
Yeah.
does feel like it just makes it a little bit harder to have like a genuine connection. I remember, traveling in the past, even areas that, I didn't know anybody, didn't know, what else was around, but just a level of friendliness and connection and conversation that tended to happen. And now it's like everyone's really, really cautious. And
Yeah.
for me, at least traveling to New Mexico, I was really actually happy to see how on board everybody was with things like masking. Here in Kansas City, it's actually really tough because we're split by a state line. So you have ordinances coming from the state level, from the county level, from the municipal level, and then individual businesses are also kind of doing their own thing. So that actually felt a little bit more comfortable and more safe to just know that, like, okay, everyone's on board with it. We're masked up, we're doing what we're supposed to do, and so is everybody else.
Yeah. It's a weird time. I'm noticing a lot that this whole ordeal has been a real test with people's ability to have empathy and compassion and understanding. It's such a weird time.
Yeah. I'll put an exclamation point behind that because I fully agree. It's
well, because like
a little bizarre.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, this has been coming up with clients lately. More than a few of them have sort of said almost that description of like languishing. Like, I don't know if you saw any of the articles where they're describing like it's not clinical or like situational depression, but it's not like a true sense of normalcy. Everyone is just sort of like going through the motions, what's the point? Just sort of languishing.
Yeah.
Like, it's come up for a couple of clients that I've talked with recently, and I've noticed it in myself too. It's like, yeah, I get it. And I don't really have a solution or great advice to share other than like, I see you, I feel that too, like we're in it together.
I think that's so valuable though too. I mean, even just in my own like healing journey, I've had to see the true value of like sitting with people, not trying to fix, but like truly sitting and resonating. But you're absolutely right. I think especially over the past year and a half, for me, it's been a whole lot of testing things out, being extremely vulnerable, trying to really work at talking about what's going on for me, and having seen clients who are going through some of the same things. There's just such value of like holding space, which is hard.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I think of all the time that I know I've mentioned it before, but I have this like little laminated card that I got at a conference like years and years ago. And I just recently moved, so it's still packed up in a box somewhere, but I always try to keep it front and center because it lists out a couple columns of important human needs. And that is one of the things that I keep front and center because I feel like that just humanizes things where it's like, okay, help me understand why maybe we keep using this like self-destructive behavior around food, or why we keep sort of like self-sabotaging. And it's like, well, that's pointing to some kind of unmet human need. And I think that's so valuable, just what you mentioned about empathy and sitting with someone as they're going through that. And then also seeing how it shows up for yourself. It's like, even us as clinicians on the other side of things, we've got those same basic human needs. And it's like, if they're not being met, we're going to try everything within our power to try to address it.
Yeah. I think it's been such a huge extension of me really recognizing that if I'm going to really try to hold that space and really throw myself into my own journey, like the people that I work with are also going to feel that too. And even on the opposite end too, like if I'm not stepping into places with my cup, full, it's going to be hard to hold space. So I think there's just been so much about the past really 2 years that have just been really enlightening, and I'm just so thankful for the process, and it's been hard.
Yeah. Again, I'll underscore that. I feel it too.
Yeah. Well, I am so excited to have you on for so many reasons. I'm going to dive into a little bit more of how much appreciation I have for you. I don't know if you knew this, but the first time that you invited me on your podcast was the first time that I've ever been on a podcast. And it was honestly a huge reason why I have this today. So I just want to thank you. I'll thank you a little bit more a little bit later. But we talked, oh my God, Rory was probably like a year or two,
It's been a
maybe.
while.
It's
Yeah.
been a while. It's been a while. So this is a loaded question. I'm going to give you a home run question before we dive into some of the nitty and gritty. Um, Update us on what you've been up to. What excites you about life right now?
Yeah, so that is a big question, and there was no prep work involved, so this is just off
No,
the cuff.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean the biggest update I mentioned I had just moved, so that's a really exciting update because my partner and I have been together for a couple years, but we were splitting time between two homes, two offices, and
Mhm.
distance wise, looking at a map, it was just about half a mile or so. But I feel like I'm very excited to just simplify things, like
Yeah.
consolidate and simplify and organize and kind of have a space that we have like together. I
Mhm.
feel like we were sort of existing as like separate entities, and now certain aspects of our lives are really joined. And part of that has to do with the space that I'm sitting in right now, because one of the catalysts for prompting this whole move and reorganization was the fact that because we do both work from home, as introverts, we really value having some space to just call our own. We can decompress, just put our
Yeah.
heads down and really focus. And because we felt like that was so important, we took some time over about the past 10 months or so to build out an office space with a kitchen that I'm able to use for my business. So I do a lot of recipe development, I do a lot of cooking demos and speaking and other media related things. So it was pretty critical to have, because that would have put a real damper on how much work I was able to do and the types of
Mhm.
relationships that I could keep going with some of the clients that I love to work with.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. Like I said, it was about a 10-month process, and we're still not 100% finished. But I'm just super excited to get in there, have a finished space that's really efficient and designed for exactly the way that I want to work. And this is the first time in my life that I've had something that's truly custom for me in that way.
It's been so cool to see, and obviously for our listeners out there, you're going to get all of the things that you need in order to follow her and look at her journey. It's been so cool to have you do the videos, and I know I've mentioned it a couple times, like, oh my god, this space looks so dope. I've really been thinking about creating something for myself. Um, is the space in the same area that you're living, or is this a completely different building?
It is, yeah. So it's the same building, and that's a
Okay.
huge luxury too. I mean, the
Oh my
commute is
god.
about, maybe 40 feet from door to door.
Yeah.
So it was a really unique opportunity, and we wanted to take advantage of it in the sense of, how can we forecast what the next 5 years looks like? What about the next
Yeah.
10? Like, what's the almost like exit strategy of what my business builds into?
Yeah.
And it's sort of weird to think that, we're already sort of preparing or forecasting of what that could look like. But it was really important to me that I just give myself options. I think one of the things that
Yeah.
helped me in the early days of my business was an open-mindedness to say, hey, I'm not sure what I like to do. I'm not even really sure what I'm good at or what I'll be able to learn. But creating a space like this, I feel like opens some opportunities to say, hey, it's maybe worth it to take a little bit of a risk, maybe take on a project that I'm not 100% on, and figure it out, because now I've got the space to really prepare for it and do it. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, the fact that it's in the same building, like I said, it just simplifies a lot of things,
That's so
because
cool.
instead of the whole process of, okay, what do I need to bring over if we're cooking dinner together? Get in the car, lock everything up, get up a
Yeah.
freight elevator to the fourth floor.
Yeah.
It just streamlines everything. So just a big time saving. And I had chatted really, really early on when we started the call about just the level
Yeah.
of inconvenience. And this is very, very much a first world problem. And I wholeheartedly own the multitude of privileges that I hold to even be
100%.
able to say this. But to reduce some of those inconveniences, I feel like has been so helpful for just what we were saying about showing up and just being fully present with clients and meeting my own needs and practicing self-care, and sort of just like walking the walk instead of just always talking about it.
Walking the walk is God, that's another hard thing. I keep coming across this in my life too, and I don't know how you feel about this, but like you have to choose your hard, right? And so one thing that has really come up for me in the past, again, 2 years, has been looking at again my own level of privilege. Right. We are talking about creating our own spaces, and I've done some similar things. I mean, what you're staring at, and for our listeners out there who can catch this on IGTV, even YouTube, I created my own little like podcast studio, right? Which is great. And I was able to create like a garage gym, which is really nice. And there is a level of privilege that comes with that. And And it's been so enlightening. I don't know how you feel about this, but it's been so enlightening to come across, and to be extremely accountable for where I'm at in my process. That work is hard.
Yeah, the accountability piece, and I think the walking the walk. I mean, I think within the past, if I had to guess, year and a half, 2 years, I feel like has really been more at the forefront than it ever had been before. And a lot of that came from like facing the reality of like, even as someone who is mixed race and experiences certain levels of microaggressions or snide comments or subtle racism or whatever. It's like at the end of the day, I benefit in a lot of ways. And I think being really honest and upfront about that, but also willing to take correction and feedback. It's really uncomfortable. And I fully admit that like my heart rate goes up, like I get a little sweaty. It doesn't feel good, but it's necessary because those are the moments where I've learned a lot. And I have a lot of teachers and other people who have been involved in that level of accountability to thank for that, because had that not happened, it's like I would just be drifting through this life pretty unaware and pretty problematic. Like I think those things, we can easily discount them and think that they're not problematic or they're not harmful. But I think just facing it out in the open and putting some light on it just says like, hey, this is the reality. Like we talk about choosing your heart. It's like my level of heart is never going to be as hard as someone who lives in a differently privileged body or a marginalized and oppressed body. Like that's the reality. And I think being honest and upfront about that makes it, I hope, easier for other people to confront how that shows up in their life too. And I kind of file that under the same category of like walking the walk. It's not enough to just talk about it. You have to actually do it.
Yeah, you have to. And it's an absolute must, and it's really hard, and it's also extremely necessary. All right, so we're about 16 minutes in. For those who are listening, you already heard me give an introduction. I always tell people this: having our guests introduce themselves and what they do, and diving into their hero's journey is always way more beneficial than the 7-minute intro that I give. So again, we're 17 minutes in. Can you please introduce yourself and what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So I guess hello and welcome to my story.
17 minutes in. What up?
But I'm Cara. I'm the owner of Street Smart Nutrition. I live in Kansas City. And I'm also a dietitian. So that's how we first got connected and kind of run in the same circles. But if I had to kind of summarize it, I like to say that what I do is help people rediscover joy in eating deeply nourishing meals without restriction or fear. And the way that I do that is through a couple different ways. I split time in private practice. So I alluded to that referring to clients. 2 days a week, I'm in private practice as part of a group of dietitians in a neighborhood not far from here. So I see folks in the office on a virtual basis, and a lot of it has to do with either eating disorder recovery and treatment, a little bit of sports nutrition, and a lot with intuitive eating and a non-diet approach. And then the rest of the time, as I also kind of alluded to with my media work, a lot of that time is spent in either nutrition communications or consulting work. I'm always really curious to learn more about where food comes from and the story about the things that we eat and who's feeding us, who's growing our food, where it comes from, and all the rest. So a lot of the work in that area is kind of like nutrition before it hits our plate. Sort of looking at the food system as a whole, doing some media tours to visit farms and actually speak with farmers and see it firsthand, bring that story and information back to then share on a number of different platforms. So like you said, there's a lot of ways to connect with me, but I am online quite a bit at this point. Yeah.
And oh my God, if for our listeners out there, if you have a chance to follow Cara in anything that she's doing, I would love to dive into like who created this wonderful person in front of us right now. But Cara, you mentioned going on farm tours. I can't not mention how the hilarity behind some of your TikTok work in reference to fucking blueberries. I can't not.
As soon as you mentioned that, I was like, I know where this is
going. Blueberries.
Well, and what's so funny is that this is like the video that just will not die. It is probably, I mean, it's probably 2 months out. I'm still getting notifications throughout the day, every day. And it's
Yeah.
like, you know, between the comments and, you know, people chiming in, it's such a different, environment or vibe on TikTok. Like the general tone is just much, much different than other platforms. Twitter might be like the closest one for just like the general level of toxicity.
Yeah.
But yeah, TikTok is interesting. I was kind of a denier for a long time because I thought, oh, you know, this is for the kids. I'm too old for that. I don't want to learn a new platform. But I realized, you know, if I kind of reframe it to say, hey, as a nutrition communicator, it would be really awesome if I could find a way to concisely communicate pretty complex things. You know, nutrition is nothing if not nuanced and completely gray instead of black and white. It's like, hey, if I can figure out how to do that in 15 seconds or less than a minute and get it out there in a way that people will find hopefully entertaining, but also educational and informative. I mean, that contributes towards that goal I mentioned earlier of helping people eat fearlessly, you know, to nourish themselves in a way that doesn't make them feel afraid or guilty or shameful. It's like, hey, if more people can feel empowered and confident about the things that they're choosing and making decisions about food in a way that aligns with their values and their lifestyle, I kind of consider that a win. So that's like a very deep analysis on like my decision to actually give TikTok a try. But here we are, you know, a little over a year in. And my best semi-viral video to date is about blueberries of all things.
Blueberries, about the size of blueberries.
Yeah.
Well, Cara, I mentioned it because I've always really valued, from what I perceive at least, your authenticity behind providing people education, providing people a space to ask more questions. And to me, it's always been really inviting with a really great dash of don't fuck with me. And I really, really enjoy that. So I have to know, because I know through a lot of your story that you talk about your collegiate career, you talk about kind of what prompted what you do today. So I would love to kind of tap back into childhood, you know, maybe starting there. Like, tell us about some things in your childhood, influential events, things that really kind of molded who you are today.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned college. So, I mean, just my background as an athlete started really, really young. You can't tell because I'm sitting here on screen, but I'm almost 6 feet tall. And so from a really young age, pretty active in sports. I mean, I did gymnastics, quickly outgrew all kinds of that sport. Did a little bit of tennis, a lot of horseback riding and equestrian events, and then getting into middle and high school, a lot of that turned to volleyball and track. So a little bit more suited for my skill set. But I was kind of late to the game in recognizing the role that nutrition plays. I came from a really rural area. And so we didn't have, you know, coaches or athletic trainers or resources like that who were well versed in the connection between nutrition and performance. So even at the collegiate level, I struggled for many years through both that, a pretty disordered relationship with food and exercise at that time, and then a lot of turnover with coaching. So overall, you know, my experience as a college athlete, I still view as an overall good thing, with the caveat that if I could go back in time, there might be some things that I'd hope to do differently if I knew then what I knew now, especially about food nutrition. But there was another, I think, really memorable time in that. And this is more related to what I said about, you know, the food system and just understanding the story behind food. Growing up in that rural area, you know, I remember the front yard of our house pretty much fed out into a field that was either corn or soybeans. And so we were pretty much surrounded by agriculture, even though my family wasn't directly involved in farming. We had a garden, you know, we had a few cattle that we would use for our own beef processing, and that was about it. So this level of disconnect that I recognized later, it was like, even though I was growing up in a really rural area like this, my understanding of food production and where it comes from in America is so far removed. And as a dietitian, here I am, you know, sharing information with people who have questions about exactly that. And it's sort of like, okay, well, this is on me to do my due diligence to really understand, so that not only am I informed for my own purposes and curiosity, but I can also share that with someone else who's curious in the same way. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest lessons too, is like learning you can be in the middle of it, but if it's not important to you, it's still not a high priority. I think offering information in the sense of like, hey, it's here if you connect with this, if you like it, if you want it, has always led to, I think, better results and more genuine connection than saying like, hey, here's my story. This is why you should believe me. And here are some facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have not found that to be very helpful. But yeah, I mean, I'm from Missouri originally. I've pretty much been in that area or close to it all my life. And so still very much surrounded by ag. And I think that's one of the things that's really shaped, how I approach my business, conversations about food and nutrition in general, and working with some great clients and being able to see things that I don't think I'd have the chance to see otherwise.
Cara, it's funny because you're talking about the role of agriculture, growing up and doing a lot of what you do now. You mentioned that you go on farm tours and whatnot. And anytime that I'm having guests on for these Friday episodes, it's been really interesting for people to talk about their experiences in childhood, adolescence to young adulthood of like why they do what they do now. And you mentioned, going through, disordered eating patterns and noticing that perhaps your height or whatever that was kind of got you out of certain sports. I mean, around that time, Cara, can we tap into how you felt about yourself during that time?
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, I went from basically being a pretty big fish in a very little pond to the exact opposite. And coming from such a small school, a really small athletic program, I just had no concept of what competition looked like at that level.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember really distinctly going to one of my very first indoor meets. It was down at the University of Arkansas. And so, I mean, huge Division I programs were down there. And that was the time that I felt like, oh shit, like I'm pretty overmatched here. Like I'm going to have to really dig deep and like get my mind right if I'm going to stay in this sport. And that's where I really did kind of struggle was, just the general insecurities of being so young. I mean, this is almost 10 years ago at that point, but I was only 17 when I went into my freshman year. And so living away from home for the first time, an entirely new circle of friends, a lot of uncertainty about what my career path was. I didn't declare my dietetics major until much later. So it was a lot of things to kind of juggle. And then on top of that, hearing and absorbing some of those pressures around body image and what a collegiate athlete, quote unquote, should look like. I didn't go to a huge university. It was a smaller D1 program, but as it happens on a lot of college campuses, the different athletic programs kind of all hang out together. There's a lot of, academic support services and, athletics training and things like that. So you're kind of always around everyone and you hear things. And it's like someone mentions that their coach made a comment, or someone is comparing the body they had when they were recruited to the body that they have now, or fears of weight gain if they've been sidelined from an injury, or a lack of fitness coming into the season. Things like that are I think really casually tossed around in that environment. And without, I think, strong guidance from either a mentor or a coach or someone who can kind of put some context around that and remind you to just, trust yourself, trust your body. I think those insecurities come to the surface in a lot of pretty self-destructive ways. So I definitely noticed that. But yeah, like I said, that first indoor meet down there, I remember Brittany Reese was in my flight for high jump. She went on to win a gold medal at the Olympics.
Yeah, right.
So I just remember thinking like, wow, okay, welcome to Division I.
It's funny too, because as Cara, as you're mentioning that, I'm kind of wondering if you can speak on this, because one theme across the board that I'm seeing with a lot of clients and that I'm seeing as I talk to other high performing people like yourself is the role of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. I think you painted a really good picture of what that might look like being in a big stadium and seeing other Division I athletes doing their thing and possibly feeling a lot of self-doubt. So I'm wondering if you can speak on not only just moments there, but in other aspects of your life where possibly imposter syndrome has come about, because it is something that a lot of people struggle with. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners can absolutely resonate with.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I think if you are not hearing this voice in your head chirp up at some point or another, it's sort of like, wow, life must be great for you. I cannot relate.
Yeah.
But I think the other really significant time that it showed up was just starting my business in the first place. Even
Mm.
though, I love the work that I do and I'm so grateful to be here now. In the early days, it's like I didn't plan on working for myself. Self-employment was not a part of my career path. It really came about between a few pretty disappointing decisions that were made from my employer at the time. My corporate position, where I was doing a lot of community nutrition and wellness programming and things like that, that position was pretty much dissolved out from under me. So in rather short order, it was like, okay, wow, I'm scrambling to look for another job. But in the meantime, it would be great if I had some opportunity for either a side hustle or alternative revenue stream somehow. So I've got to figure this out. And I really struggled with that because it was like, how do I approach this when, it's like working the equivalent of two full-time jobs to say, okay, here I am in clinic for, my full-time corporate position. Here I am trying to grow this on the side. What business do I have running a business? Like who's going to work with me? Do they find my services valuable? Am I even doing this, air quotes, right? And self-doubt and imposter syndrome, I think absolutely shows up there. The other interesting phenomenon, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I watched a video recently about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it kind of describes like that opposite of like the bell-shaped curve, where it's like if you're the novice or the amateur, you have a pretty high level of confidence. You think, okay, wow, I know enough to be dangerous, and I'm pretty vocal about it. But then as your knowledge base grows, you start to realize like, wow, even though I know a little bit, there's so much that I don't know. And your confidence actually goes down. Like you hit the dip in that curve. And then by the time you get to be, very, very expert in a certain area, it's like your confidence goes back up, but it's tempered with the fact that like, that maybe you're not always right. And so that's, kind of the other. And I see that all the time with just nutrition topics and conversations about health in general. It's like sometimes the most vocal voices or the biggest platforms I picture as being kind of like over here. And then it's like the true experts, they're the ones who are actually pretty quiet, or, they've just got their head down, focused, doing their thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the folks that I think are maybe experiencing that imposter syndrome to the highest degree, it's like, there's still opportunity for them to connect or share or have a place in that space.
Yeah.
But in a sense, we're almost like drowned out by like these other voices that really are not qualified or credentialed. So I feel like that really shows up a lot, especially on social media places, just talking about Twitter in general. I feel like it definitely shows up there.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I always like to think of people who honor their ideas, whether it's starting a business or a nonprofit or, whatever that is. I always view people as like who honor their ideas and go with it, even though they might not have all the answers, but they put themselves out very vulnerably as like the heroes. Because it is a very vulnerable process. And I'm wondering, Cara, for you, I mean, obviously when you started this business, the life that you're living right now, you didn't have any guarantees, right? What helped you during those moments where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work?
Yeah, I feel like the honest answer to that is like, if this doesn't work, what do I have to do? Like, I almost viewed it in the sense of like, I knew I was really unhappy working in, corporate like healthcare fields. Like as a clinical dietitian, I was not happy. I was good at it because I had that skill set and training, and I could, kind of trust the education that got me there and qualified me for that job. But at the end of the day, I didn't enjoy the idea of punching in and out on a time clock, or not having much flexibility in my schedule. And the trade-offs in my eyes really align more with what I find important and valuable. And I think really trusting in the sense that, okay, yeah, from the outside looking in, maybe this doesn't look like how someone else might do it. Like I gave up, a lot of stability, a lot of predictability and security. At the end of the day, that's, I think, what it boils down to, and what can sometimes keep people, hesitant to take a risk or hesitant to make a change. It's like the security of just knowing, like, I can trust this process and I know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
Versus saying, I really like having the ability to adjust my days if I need to, or to take time off to spend with family if I need to, or want to. I think, that was the other idea of just broadening, okay, here's what I need to do versus here's what I want to do, and here's what I get to do. Mm-hmm. And if I weigh that more heavily against some of the things that I'm maybe walking away from by leaving a corporate job and that level of security, it's like, at least at this point in my life, I do feel like it's worth it, despite, just like you said, no guarantees, no like a safety net in a sense. But forecasting for the future too, it's like, could this still get me to where I want to be in the next 5, 10 or more years? What does that look like down the road? And at least, again, at this point in time, speaking just for myself, I feel like this is a better way to get to the type of life I aspire to have versus, kind of being like another cog in the wheel and working really hard for somebody else.
Yeah. Which my wife jokes with me all the time. She'll say, like, Desi, you are so fantastic, but you're not meant to be an employee. And I really, at first there's such a huge like sense of shame. We're like, oh, I should probably like follow directions and be okay with the 9 to 5. But I wasn't happy. I was like, I hate doing this. I like to honor my ideas. I like to honor my time. And you also mentioned something too, Cara, that I thought was really important, like having the flexibility to be able to kind of mold time around some of your needs. And you mentioned time with family. And one of the things that I'm finding with a lot of our guests is it all centers back to like healthy, driven relationships. So I would love to tap into those most important relationships. One of those being, if you're willing, just kind of backstory. So I don't know how long ago this was. I think it might have been in one of your stories, but you had mentioned, hey, I might butcher it, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Hey, it's okay for you to answer like DMs, right? Because your partner right now that you're dating hit you up via DM, right?
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, the backstory on that is interesting, but I think it's significant because it definitely set my life on a really different path. And I think that was one of the other ways that, we haven't touched on this much so far, but I'm such a huge advocate for this non-diet approach and intuitive eating, because I've seen firsthand how once you can trust your body and trust your intuition in certain areas like that, it's only inevitable that it's going to ripple out into other areas of your life, like your relationships. And so, my partner that I have right now, he and I are not married, but at one point I was married to someone else. And that was one of the luxuries that I had when I was getting my business off the ground. A lot of people ask, what was really helpful? Did you do this? Did you do that? And I said, honestly, one of the most helpful things was having the luxury of a partner at the time, a spouse who did have benefits, who did have a full-time income, who could basically finance that year or more that you're not making a profit and you're barely bringing in money. So I don't want to paint the illusion that this was just, bootstrapping and just work hard enough and just want it hard enough. Like, I had the benefit of a spouse at the time who did burden or did bear that burden of a lot of the financial stresses that we had. Ultimately, we did part ways for a number of reasons, but I do feel like seeing the difference of how we approached, just our work lives or professional lives versus like who we were as people. It was just a very different approach. And it's not to say that, it's right, wrong. It's just different. He's a great person in a lot of ways, but I could not imagine myself being happy working the way that he worked. So, at this point, like I said, the DMs were open at the time. The partner that I have right now is fantastically supportive, and I'm so appreciative of the way that he really champions my business and sees the potential and contributes ideas and just creative brainstorming sessions with me and things like that. And that's much more closely aligned with, the way that you can't really separate, if you're a business owner, it's really hard to separate sometimes who you are as a person and who you are as your business, because your business is such a manifestation of who you are.
Yeah.
To not have that tension of like flipping the switch. Okay, here I am, just me, versus here I am, the dietitian, versus here I am, entrepreneur. To have that all just kind of be able to seamlessly mesh into one. It just, again, going back to that value, I keep coming back to it. Like, I love simplicity. I love convenience. And that just seems so much more aligned with how I wanted my life to look.
Cara, I love, you said it, I think probably 3 times there. I love that you mentioned alignment. It is so important and so beneficial to understand how important that is and to go down that path. One of my best mentors, when I hired her to help me build what I truly was aligned with, I would ask her questions, and she would always point it back to, well, what do you feel aligned to? And I remember in the first month or two, I was like getting so pissed off, because I'm like, listen, I'm I'm hiring you to give me the answers. And one of the things that she had said was so beneficial, and I'm wondering if we can tap back into this, is that, like, if I tell you what to do, then I'm not building your business that you're aligned to, I'm building mine. And that was such a
Yeah.
huge thing in my life, where I was like, alignment is probably one of the most beneficial things to go down that path. And you just mentioned that, and I thought it was fantastic that you did.
Yeah, I mean, I think when things are out of alignment in any domain of your life, it's not to say that it all has to be perfectly aligned 100% of the time, across the board, because I think that's pretty unrealistic and maybe paints this illusion that that's like the goal. I don't think that's the goal. But I see a lot of parallels between that and my work as a dietitian, because what you just described with a business coach or mentor, it's like, hey, I've come to you and I want you to have the solution. Just make it easy for me.
Yeah.
And so many of my clients, they come in and they're like, this is actually pretty different. Like, I thought maybe you'd just give me a meal plan. We would like brainstorm some ideas. And it's like, I could do that. I absolutely could. But that creates a lot of dependence on me. I don't want to just be regurgitating meal plans and constantly updating these. And it's also that I don't know what you like. I don't know if you want to cook tonight. I don't know if you're hungry at 5:30 or 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to be home, or if you've got the right tools or the budget that supports this, or the transportation to get to the grocery. Like, I don't know any of that. And so what I kind of go back to is like, it's so cliche, but it's like, you give a person a fish, they eat for a day. So like, you teach a person a fish, like, it gives them the tools to again make those case by case decisions and bring those things more into alignment. On any given day, things may feel out of alignment, or there's that tension or discomfort there, and it's like, yeah, maybe that's not something we can address right now, but maybe there's another domain of your life where you do feel like you have a little bit more control over things, or you can be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive. And with food and eating, that's sort of the template that I work from, but I wholeheartedly believe like that trickles out into a lot of different places.
Well, it absolutely does too. And I love the fact that you talked about taking a non-diet approach and engaging your body and understanding your body enough and seeing that it ripples out into certain areas. Cara, can you share, like, again, we're going back to alignment, right? Can you share some of the work that you've been personally doing to stay in that alignment? Like, what have been some of the hard things that you've had to encounter just in your journey?
Therapy, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a huge privilege to be able to afford therapy, to access it, to regularly go. I kind of had a gap there for a while, but I'm back in it. And I think mental health is so important, and it's really a shame that it's not more readily affordable and accessible. That's kind of on very much a personal level. I think another thing too, this sort of happened around the same time that, we were kind of in lockdown, spending a lot of time online. This was prior to George Floyd and everything like that. But I made the decision to invest in a lot of anti-racism training, because for me, alignment was really tough, because like I mentioned before, I'm mixed race. My mother is Korean, my father is white. And I struggled for a long time with, okay, am I a person of color? Like, how does this show up for me? Do I experience racism? Do I also act through racism? Like, am I also problematic and harmful and contributing to the problem? And it was like, yeah, I am. And that's out of alignment. Like that's not who I want to be. That's not how I want to show up for other people. And it's not just, it's just not authentic. And so realizing, okay, it's like, yeah, I have a lot of learning to do of how that shows up for me as a mixed race Asian person, but also how anti-Blackness shows up in my own beliefs and biases, how that carries that through in my work, in my personal life. It's baked into everything, and living in America and growing up and being socialized through that culture of white supremacy. It's like, I was just, like, to put it bluntly, like a fucking mess.
Yeah.
That process is very much ongoing and continuing. And like I said, there's a lot of really great people who I've learned from along the way who have helped get me there. But I'm also sort of in that place where I'm like, wow, I know a little bit, but it only makes me realize, like, how much I still don't know.
Well, it goes back to that curve that you were talking about. I mean, I'm a firm believer, like, the more that you educate yourself, the more that you understand of how much you don't know. And Cara, god damn, like, I was a fucking mess too. Like, a lot of therapy has needed to be had, because my therapy journey started a long time ago, and most of my therapists were white, and there was an ongoing joke, and they were also older in age. Like, I had two therapists that retired, and we would joke like, yeah, Desi's retiring therapist type of thing. But I noticed, because I also took a break, I noticed the need to find a therapist of color so that I could, like, truly be present in just what was going on in my mind. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that, like, you spent and invested in anti-racism training. And because I remember very distinctly, I had started reading So You Want to Talk About Race. I forgot the author, but I was 2 chapters in, and it was just so much to sit with. And I remember having a very early on, when it just happened, I remember having a conversation with a good friend who was also white, and we were on opposite sides of the spectrum with our beliefs. And remember, we had lunch, and an hour conversation later, I just got home defeated. And my wife had just said, like, hey, like, are you okay? And I remember just like, no, I'm not. Because being a Latino, my wife being white, and our daughter being also mixed, is like, I don't know, like, what to tell her. Like, I don't know. Um, and I think it takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of true empathy to sit and have these conversations, because it is profoundly hard.
Yeah, and I think the really quick comment that you made early on about why representation matters, I can use that as an example of, like, I used to think, like, yeah, that's all we need, just more representation, like, people will get to know us, like, accept us, appreciate us. And now realizing that no, it's so much deeper than that. And to have to heal kind of from, like, the inside out. I borrow that framework from Monique Melton. So credit to her for that. I love a good framework. She knows this. We've talked.
Yeah.
But she shared this really early on in one of my courses with her. And I really resonated with that, because it was like, yeah, here I am kind of, trying to help other people heal, through my work as a dietitian, especially because at that point, having done this non-diet approach and intuitive eating for several years at that point, it was like, okay, yeah, I can see how I'm able to support this or show up with this for other people. But it's like, have I also done that for myself? Like, there was a lot of inner healing that needed some nurturing. And just like you said, when you're surrounded by people who don't have that same lived experience, or who can logically or rationally understand it, but they haven't really felt it, it's like that's kind of a limitation. Like, the ceiling for that is just much, much lower than if you can have that conversation with someone who's also been there, done that, and maybe has that ceiling even higher, like to, almost like tugboat you along in your own journey with that. Like I said, I used to think that representation was enough. I would get so excited, seeing an Asian actress, or, like, I remember when like Crazy Rich Asians came out, and I was just, like, over the moon about it. And then looking back on it now,
such a good movie.
My perspective has totally changed, because I was like, yeah, that almost, like, pacifies everybody's need to say, oh, let's keep going with this. Like, let's push it even further. They're like, here, have a bone. We made this movie for you, and that's enough. Like, it's not enough.
Yeah. All right. I was trying to think about how I wanted to throw this in, but you just gave me a transition.
Oh.
Speaking of throwing bones, I want to get your take on this. And this just might be in the dietetic field. So far, our listeners out there, um, the dietetic field is not very diverse. I forgot the stats. Our wonderful friends of the pod from Diversified Dietetics probably hit me with them. So we'll have them on at some point so we can talk about it a little bit more. But our academy, our governing body, had just released a badge of some sort. I don't know. I don't know what it is. To me, it pissed me off for a bunch of reasons. So speaking of throwing bones, Cara, what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, a lot. So full disclosure, I'm actually not an Academy member anymore. I let my membership lapse this year for the first time since I became a dietitian. And it was, again, going back to that idea of alignment. For me to financially invest in an organization that I don't feel like reflects my values or me, I would much rather divert that, support someone like Diversified Dietetics or local communities, people basically like within my inner network, here in Missouri or in Kansas City or whatever. And so, again, kind of just how my perspectives have changed over a while. It's like in the beginning, I was pretty active. I volunteered at the state.
100%. Yeah.
At the DPG level, which is our dietetic practice groups, with the, sort of misdirected belief of like, I can be a change maker from like the inside out. Like I love dietitians. I want to be part of this field. I want to give back. Here's how I do it. And I say that it was a little bit misdirected because at the time I was pretty naive in thinking that it's like, yeah, a single DPG could potentially, change things, or, one executive committee has the leverage to say, hey, this is how we're going to start doing things differently. And I say that was a little bit naive because I didn't necessarily see that happening, not even just, in the ones that I was directly a part of, but kind of throughout the academy as a whole. And, what you alluded to with the lack of diversity and how they had responded or reacted to some of the major events over the past couple of years, it's sort of like, yeah, at this point, I don't really feel like they're there for me in the way that I want them to be. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like for that, it feels like a little bit traitorous to be like, oh, I'm a dietitian, I don't like the academy.
Yeah.
And it's not to temper it and say that like, oh, there's some, redeeming qualities too. I think it's representative of a lot of other systems where it's like, you can have really great individuals or really well-intentioned, genuine people, but at the end of the day, the dietetics profession as a whole does not have a great history. If we look at just the early origins and how exclusive it's been, it is a profession built by and for rich white women. And if you are not in that demographic, it is much, much harder to even break into the field or find that same level of success and fulfillment within that field.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like there's a lot of ways that my views have changed towards the academy as a whole, towards, the profession as a whole. Don't get me wrong. I still love being a dietitian. I love what I do, but I think a lot of that is because of the fact that I do it on my terms now. This is probably another major reason why I'm similar to you. I'd probably make a terrible employee at this time. And I might just, I don't know, change career fields, figure out something else, maybe opt out altogether. I don't know. Thankfully, it's hypothetical. I don't actually have to make that decision. But I've definitely thought about it.
It's so funny that you mentioned the opt out thing. My sister just got into her dietetic internship, and so she's doing it right now. And I had mentioned it, and she was like, Des, please don't, like, you're the reason why I'm doing this. And I was like, listen, like, I don't want to paint any picture. Like, I don't want to sully your opportunity here. I just want to like give you the facts of what's going on and how much they really don't value you. But I'm going to let you get there. And it was really cool to have that open conversation with her, because we started talking a bit more about alignment. We started talking a bit more about making decisions that align with our values. And the first thing, Cara, that comes up for me, and I'm wondering if you can speak on this. Obviously, this podcast is centered around creating opportunities for people to navigate their hero's journey, and the concept of like superpowers kind of comes up for me, and I wonder if you can talk on what your superpowers are. What are those comparisons for you?
Ooh, yeah. That's an interesting question, because I feel like I don't view myself as necessarily like this superhero, but I do think one of the things, and I've shared this with interns and mentees and things like that. It's like, especially as a business owner, someone who's self-employed or an entrepreneur and kind of wears that role. I think that persona of being a superhero is sometimes self-assigned, but I think also assigned by the outside looking in, by, everyone else observing you doing these exciting things and making moves and hustling and grinding and all that, over romanticized stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess if anything, like the one thing I keep coming back to is like, you have the hustle, which is like that very glamorized, romanticized view of being an entrepreneur. And that's what gets celebrated a lot. That's what, puts on your superhero cape, in this analogy.
Yeah.
But it's like, you have to also be willing to shovel the shit. And that's like the behind the scenes stuff, like the grunt work that is not at all glamorous, is incredibly frustrating, and just, will make you pull your hair out because it's so frustrating. And it's like, if you're willing to do that, ultimately, I feel like that's the superpower, like the willingness to just say, I see what needs to be done. I don't want to do it, but like, this is the right thing for my business. This is the right thing for me. So I'm going to do it. And it does suck. I think, again, we really over romanticize this idea of like, oh, wow, you work for yourself, everything must be awesome. You get to just do whatever you want. And like, yeah, in a lot of ways that's true. I'm not going to say that there's not an infinite number of perks and benefits that come with that. But it's also like saying, hey, if I recognize that, like, stuff is just like on fire and it's got to get put out, like I might be pulling an all-nighter to get my finances straight for when I meet with my accountant the next day, or something is just going haywire with a client and we're combing through a contract, reading the fine print and trying to figure this out together, and a lot of just on the fly problem solving. And I think, again, like if anything, I guess the superpower would be, hey, I see this, I don't want to do it, but I have to do it, so I'm going to do it.
I love how truthful that answer was, because it is absolutely true. Because hustle and no days off and no sleep does get romanticized. And I tend to think, like, I always chalk it up to, anytime I see that type of message, I'm like, this is what toxic masculinity fucking looks like. Stop it. Like, I hate this. I hate this. And it is so frustrating. And so, Cara, I want to be respectful of your time. We're at 1:57. How are we doing with time? Do you have a hard stop?
I do, actually. Yeah, we've got to get some stuff done, but I love this conversation. I wish we could keep going, because I know we could talk for hours.
We'll have to have a part 2 at some point. All right. So last 2 questions for you. I want to respect your time. Obviously, this is the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. So I always like to ask our guests, do you think that you've made it? And if not, what does making it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can pay my bills every month. So I do feel like I've made it to the point that, there's a level of financial stability now that I definitely did not have, but was working towards. I'm at the point now where I feel like in some ways I have made it because of that financial stability, but in a lot of ways, there's still a lot of uncertainties. So, I am not a homeowner. We share one vehicle at this point. Like, there's a lot of things that I feel like if you were using a measuring stick of like what you should have or what you're supposed to have, it's like, oh yeah, they haven't really made it. But at least for me, I'm more than content. I'm happy with the way that life is. And to me, that's more important than some of those material things, or saying like, hey, look at this expensive house that I bought and filled with things. So in that sense, I mean, there's definitely still big goals that I would like to try to accomplish, things that I want to get done, but I'm also not in a rush. And I think feeling like, hey, I can let my foot off the gas a little bit. Like, I can kind of enjoy what I've made, this free time or this flexibility or this ability to be creative or pursue other interests. It's like, that to me is like, yeah, actually, this is what I wanted. This is where I'm at.
Yeah. Ah, I love it. All right. Last question for you, Karen. Then I will let you go. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so like I said, I spend a lot of time online. We covered TikTok, Twitter. I think the only
Killing
ones
it.
left are Instagram, and I've got my website, which is streetsmartnutrition.com. I do have a newsletter. It goes out twice a month, and that's just a great way to keep in touch and the things that I'm working on, some events. I like to kind of comb through and share recipes that I'm either enjoying that week or interesting things that I've read. I think that's a really great way to hang out because that's if I had to give a little teaser, that's like the exclusive content.
Hey.
There's some things there that actually don't go out on social media. So to me, that's a really fun project because it's like, hey, this is a way to just talk directly with like a really connected group. You know, people will respond to emails sometimes, or they'll hit reply and share a story, or be like, hey, I made that recipe you shared. It turned out awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's a level of connection that you don't really get those other places. But any of them are great options. I always love hearing from people. The DMs aren't always open anymore just because of the sheer volume of what I get. Yeah, throwback to the way that
There you
my
go.
met in the first place. But if the DMs aren't open, there's always other ways to find me online.
Yeah. Yes. I love it. All right. Cara, the authentic and vulnerable person in me thanks the authentic and vulnerable person in you. You have continued to be a huge motivation for me. Again, I started this podcast because the first podcast that I even landed on was yours. So, Cara, I just want to thank you for being an amazing human, colleague and friend. Until we see each other in real life, this is going to have to do. But I just want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, and thank you so much. This is a really fun way to bring it full circle, and I'm just glad to repay the favor. My podcast isn't active anymore, but I still remember that conversation, and
Yeah.
it is really exciting just to see how you've grown and progressed and all the great things that you're doing. So I love this conversation. Like I said, I wish we could keep it going, but maybe part two, who knows?
Part two. Okay. All right. So for our listeners out there, again, give Cara a big shout out. She's amazing. I'll catch you all on the next one later.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You got it.